Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen, and I'm so pleased that you can all be here this evening. This is our first lecture of the fall season, and I want to welcome both our in-person audience and indeed our online audience. We've had a really very enthusiastic response to this lecture, and rightly so, because you are in for a treat. This lecture is part of our Labour, Literature and Landmark lecture series. Tonight's program is presented in partnership with the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and I would like to express our appreciation to them for all their help. For those of you who might be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen was founded in 1785 by 22 artisans. Today, our 237-year-old organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of the City of New York through our educational and cultural programs, including our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, the General Society Library, of course, of which you're in this evening, the John M. Mossman Lock Museum, which is upstairs, and you're welcome to have a look at the end of the lecture, and our nearly 200-year-old lecture series, of which, of course, tonight is part of. For our online audience, please feel free to submit questions throughout the lecture through the Q&A section. And of course, at the conclusion of the talk, we would ask that you use the Q&A section rather than raise your hand. For our in-person audience, we ask that you keep your questions until the conclusion of the talk. It is a great pleasure for the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York to welcome some of the Bertolini Architectural Works team who've been doing such magnificent work on the restoration of Tudor City. Speaking here this evening, we have Oswald L. Bertolini, AIA, and who is the principal of Bertolini Architectural Works. We have Eric Vonderhyde, principal. We have Ryan Hopewell, assistant principal. And finally, we have Carlos Honorio, AIA, associate principal. Oswald Bertolini has had extensive experience in the restoration of historical buildings and residential design, having practiced in the New York metropolitan area since 1981. He is a registered architect credited with license in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, as well as the National Council of Registration Boards, and is a member of the American Institute of Architects and the New York Society of Architects. Eric Vonderhyde has acquired extensive experience in the restoration and waterproofing of New York City buildings, with a strong background in historic and landmark quality properties. He has an associate's degree in construction technology and a bachelor in architecture from Pratt Institute. Ryan Hopewell is a construction professional with 15+ years industry experience. He has experience from all areas of construction, from initial planning and design through execution. He has extensive knowledge of complete facades and roof systems, ranging from pre-war to modern construction techniques. He holds a BS in industrial technology with a concentration in construction from Southeast Missouri State and an MS in construction management from NYU. Carlos Honorio has more than 15 years experience in managing all aspects of large architectural and construction projects. Mr. Honorio brings a deep knowledge in assessing and developing technical solutions for all types of facades and structural deficiencies geared towards full compliance with FISP L11/98 requirements. He's a registered architect in New York and is a member of the American Institute of Architects. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce to you our first speaker tonight, from Bertolini Works. And that is Oswald Bertolini. Welcome, Oswald.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Happy to be here and present to you the introduction to tonight's theme, which is the Tudor City District and the buildings that compose it. There's a whole bunch kind of mid-height, you'd say now. They were really tall when they were built, and some lower buildings. They're all basically developed around the park in a very interesting area. This is a very forward project when it was created in the 1920s. So, but Carlos is going to go deeper into the history of the complex later on. I have to say that it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm trying to highlight a few of the interesting points of the design and the whole ethos of what makes Tudor City Place. So one of the interesting things, architecturally speaking, is the style of the construction, but I will focus probably more on the materials. So the style is sort of a revival neo-Gothic, and you can see that in the buildings, and some of the photographs are going to come later on. And the most interesting thing to us is the building, of course, has some noble materials, has some granite at the base. There's some limestone at the base of the building, the first, second story typically. But as you go up, then you have the body of the buildings that are developed in common brick, and they have heavy ornamentation, which as soon as you get up, it's all made of terracotta. This is a very interesting material, and that's what I want to talk about, because people sometimes don't recognize it for what it is. And it is the element that we have to work the hardest, and is the most complex to both repair, replace, and preserve over the years. Originally, terracotta was considered a fantastic material. It was a huge progress, and it had a lot of advantages for the developers for the time. I mean, first of all, it was way cheaper than the real stones, so that was a huge plus. Then, as a marble material, it was fireproof. In addition, it was much lighter than full stones, because you'll see later on, terracotta is hollow. And to top it all off, which made it fantastic, was pretty much waterproof, because part of the process, it ends up with a glaze, which makes it totally waterproof. So except for the joints, the water didn't go in. Now, to where we are now, 100 years later almost, the terracotta has lost the exterior glazing, and therefore it has become weak, and it's begun to fail. So all of these conditions are going to be the heart of our presentation, and we have done a lot of work on many iterations. I have to say that our firm started working in the previous life with different partners in 1991. The conditions of the buildings have improved dramatically thanks to the efforts of many people, starting with the boards of the buildings that helped make the decisions and provided the financing and the wherewithal to get all of this stuff done. Originally, they were fantastic, and they worked as very well, and they were created around the parks. But when they started deteriorating, at some point, they turned into cheaper rentals, and then thankfully, they became co-ops. And again, investments started to flow back into the buildings. I have to say, when I first walked into the buildings, we had like some areas that had been made waterproof by applying tar. So whomever was running the buildings didn't have a lot of respect for the wonderful architecture, but also they didn't understand how tar works, because it popped open and the water kept coming in. Let me see. So the key to what terracotta is, let me see if I can change the image. Okay, let's see. I'm not going to repeat that. So this is an old view of the area, and you can tell by that time you have the big chimney flues, and there was a giant kind of plant that was supposed to be replaced with a surprise, probably another skyscraper. This will give you a sense of what we saw when we just got to the buildings. That was in 1999, 8 years into our mission of trying to save the buildings. And the terracotta has been removed there. And if you look inside, the dark part is rusted steel. So we had to do several deep interventions, not only to repair the exterior fabric, but going in there and in some cases reinforcing or replacing some of the steel members. The buildings are very noble. They're overbuilt, and they work as a mixed structure, so nothing collapsed. And that was a little miracle in itself. Part of the explaining to you what terracotta is, I think that some people have a sense, but basically it's clay, very finely grounded and selected. There are few quarries where you can get the materials that will perform well, because you're looking for consistency, you're looking for color, you're looking to how this will react when it gets baked in a kiln. But as you can see, as much as it will look to stone when it's all done, this is an old original drawing, not from these buildings, but it shows how this used to be put together. So the terracotta is hollow, and some of the voids are filled with masonry, basically brick and mortar. And there are some hooks and steel clips and some double angles back to back that hold it into place when it projects a lot, typically in cornices and elements like that, some balconies too. This shows how brittle it is. This is not dissimilar, it's a pot, and that's the way terracotta performs, and that's the way it fails. So terracotta, when you look at what goes into the buildings, is much heavier, is denser, is thicker, and is, like I said, glazed and waterproofed. But here you go. This is, I think, 5 Tudor City Place, and you can see that there had been an attempt to correct this in a previous restoration program, which was cheap, by sealing the cracks. But then the movement and the pressure from the steel inside, it pushed it out and it cracked it again. At that point, we had no choice but to replace the entire section of this water table at the base of the parapet. The other consequence that I want to make a note of, once the terracotta becomes porous and the water comes in, it starts a pernicious process, which is the steel that is inside will get rusted. And steel grows like by a factor of 7 or 8 when it turns into rust. Even though rust is not that strong, it's definitely stronger than most stones and absolutely more stronger than terracotta. So we'll crack it very easily. So just to put in perspective, you may have a piece of steel that is, say, 5/8 of an inch thick. And if you lose just 1/8 of an inch, it will grow by 7/8 of an inch, and it will push the terracotta out by an inch. That is highly destructive. It's pretty obvious when you think about it like that. So once the process starts snowballing, it's very difficult to control it. And that's why all these programs have to be done very carefully. You need to think about them and design them in a way that can be built. There's this kind of a balancing act because also somebody has to come up with the money to do this. And we want to keep the appearance of the building. And of course, we need to make sure that they comply with the requirements, both from the Department of Buildings and the Landmarks Preservation Commission, that are not always in sync. Those are ornamental pieces of terracotta that were removed from the building. And I would like you to focus on a couple of things. One is that as much as you see cracks on the outside, there are also internal cracks. And in addition to that, and I do have actually, I want to show you this. I don't know if you can all see it, but can you see that there's a dirty part and a clean part? So the cracks develop slowly, and the water comes in, the dirt and the contamination come in, and the water flows at some point, and eventually it produces cracks that goes through the entire unit of terracotta. And this makes it hard to repair, but also when it collapses, it becomes a catastrophic failure. It's sudden, it's unpredictable, and you can just not go by the cracks that you observe in the surface. So it is important, and there's been a refocusing of the energies of the Department of Buildings in the last, I would say, 8 or 10 years, and they have toughened up the regulations, and they want to make sure that everybody that walks around these buildings is safe. So with good reason. If you're looking at that, this is a perfect example. This is not Tudor City Place, of how an entire section can collapse suddenly. And in this case, you see it has become loose and it just went down to the street, and most of it seems to be a relatively recent crack. You don't have the dirt of something that's been open for, say, 10 or 12 years. That's another example of a critical failure, catastrophic result. And there's no other choice than to rebuild it, like we say in the trade, to the bone. You need to go down, remove everything, figure out how it's put together, restore the steel substructure that holds. It's not a real structure like columns are holding up your floors, but it's a substructure that projects from the building. It's cantilever, and then around it, you build a terracotta. The process is delicate. It's complicated for us to design. And my partner, Eric, would say that it's a lot of fun because we never know what we're going to find once we do the demolition, which is always interesting. Our best guesses, and we have fun doing this in the office, we look at a building and we guess how the structure is run inside. When we do the demo, maybe 2/3 of the time we're right. And the rest of the time we're saying, oh my God, who did this? What were they thinking? We just opened up a building, not here, but down on Broadway. And we found an amazing substructure that was holding up a beautiful terracotta cornice projecting several feet out over the sidewalk. And this was floating, sitting on top of a parapet, and it had a ton of masonry above. So the weight was holding this kind of fingers of steel that were coming out into the street. Unthinkable. But you know what? In a certain sense, it's fascinating that these buildings have been around for, some of them over 100 years. In the case of Tudor City, they're over 90 years, some of the construction. So the next slide, I wanted to talk about, right now there's 2 big producers of terracotta in the United States. There's one more that does it in England, but as you can imagine, moving these huge chunks of stone back and forth, it's not very economical. And one of the fabulous things about the terracotta in those days was that labor was so cheap. So they were not afraid to create different units that were not repetitive because they were carving them by hand anyway. So that means that you're not shipping 5 pieces to England, you may be shipping 120 pieces to create 500. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. But in any case, this shows roughly what the process is for creating new terracotta. And basically, they need to remove the units, rebuild them, put them together, then they copy them, and then they create forms. One of the challenging things, and they require a lot of attention and a lot of labor, is that terracotta is formed, then you add the clay, which contains water, you let it sit for a few days, then you take it out of the form, you let it dry, and then it goes into a kiln. And then guess what? It shrinks. So your form is supposed to be larger And that's what requires a lot of work, because then it's going to shrink to the right size. Let me see if I can. Simple process for extrusion, that's all identical. That's a more traditional unit being built by hand. So as you can see, you have a form, they're placing all the terracotta and they're pushing it into place, and then that's going to be dried and it's going to go to the kiln. The more delicate piece, as you can see, is being done, then it's touched up by hand, and that's why these things take so long. It's set up in dry because before you go to the site, you want to make sure that everything fits. And one more point I want to make, that we also have worked on many aspects of these buildings, the restoration, but it's very important to understand the team effort that we need to make, the cooperation we get from everybody. And we work with the Department of Buildings, with the Landmarks Preservation Commission. We work with the management companies that run these buildings. We work very closely with the boards that run every one of them, and they need to take care of their finances. The contractors, which do a fantastic job. This is not easy by any means. You'll see some pictures down the line. And of course, all of this to get it done with the residents in the building. And we do appreciate their patience and the love they have for their buildings, because sometimes, you know, they're outside of their terraces, or they have pipe scaffolding in front of their windows for weeks and weeks and weeks. And they do love the buildings, and I think they're gorgeous. We're happy to work with them and to be a part of the process. Thank you very much. Carlos Honorio will take over a little bit of the presentation of the history of these buildings. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carlos Honorio from Bertolini Architectural Works. I am an associate principal. I will be discussing the history of Tudor City. Let's see. Fred French, originally from the Bronx, like me, was the developer behind Tudor City Development. One of his iconic buildings, the Fred French building shown here, it's filled with ornate details, particularly high usage of polychromatic terracotta. A couple close-ups of the polychromatic terracotta being used. So the way we interpret the master plan of Tudor City, essentially a robust green landscape as a central focal point, shown there. And then you have the surrounding buildings, and then you have essentially close proximity to Grand Central. And that was the key selling point when you're trying to attract residents. That was the whole idea behind Tudor City, city within the city, close proximity to transportation hubs and walking distance from your office. It's the master plan. And I'm just pretty much going to highlight the parks. And then each building, it's 12 buildings that were constructed originally as part of the master plan, and its completion dates. Sorry, that's Prospect Tower, 1927. The Manor, 1927, Tudor Tower, 1928, the Cloister, 1928, the Hermitage, 1928, Hayden Hall, 1929, Hardwick Hall, 1929, Hatfield House, 1929, Woodstock Tower, 1929, Essex House, 1929, and Windsor Tower, 1930. I'm sorry, and then Hotel Tudor, 1930. So those were the original 12 buildings constructed. And then in 1956, you have two Tudor City Place, which is called Tudor Gardens. Now, the area was much different back in the late 1800s. Here's a photo of 42nd Street looking up north on 2nd Avenue. Before the United Nations, First Avenue was lined up with slaughterhouses, infamously nicknamed Blood Alley. The existing tenement buildings help mask the beauty of such a potential site. Fred oversaw all of the obstacles and pushed forward through this with this unprecedented project. Another picture of the tenement buildings there being bought by Fred. So during the Roaring 20s, Fred was able to attract numerous investors through rigorous ad campaigns to raise the capital required to pretty much develop the project. Too bad I was 60 years born too late. I would have invested. Again, the ad campaigns pretty much plastered all over the tenement buildings around this area. Stock certificates, wish I had one. Fred wanted to provide an outer urban experience within the city, which incentivized those that appreciate walking to work. He advertised Grand Central, one of the city's main transportation hubs, which had major impact on its development, thriving, and was part of the marketing campaign for future residents, as you see here with this ad. Another ad, and one more. I won't go into the details of that one, but you can get it. You can get what's going on. Tudor City Green Landscape is an overview. There is a tennis court in front of 5 Tudor City Windsor Tower, and then you have two parks, north and south. I don't know if it's a myth, but Fred used to pay professional athletes to visit the park as guest appearances. I don't know if that's true or not, but view of the park. And also you have communal roof spaces, right? You have a dense population within this area. Part of it is provide communal spaces. So this is a picture atop 45 Tudor City Place. And this is a present day picture. The next building, the building next door, 25 Tudor City Place, but it's the same construction. All right, so now we're gonna talk about construction type. So the exterior is pretty much cladded with non-glazed solid brick masonry walls, and most of its weight is sitting up top the perimeter spandrel beams. Decorative facade features, we have terracotta units that you pretty much used to mimic the Tudor revival style. Base floors were cladded with natural stones such as limestone, sandstone, and granite. It's a steel frame building. Structural beams are encased in cinder concrete, while the columns are encased in either brick masonry or terracotta hollow units. The floor is cinder slab concrete construction. And this is a schematic detail. This is a typical detail of what you've seen back then when you're constructing buildings. And that's what we see too when we open up some of these parapets, some of these wall areas, and Ryan will show some detailed photos of that. This is a photo of when 5 Tudor City Windsor Tower was being constructed. Again, as Oswald mentioned, terracotta is a hollow unit. So essentially when you're opening up areas like this, all these units are hollow. So they're lightweight, but you really can't pick them up by yourself, but they're lighter than it being solid. Imagine that being full concrete or some other solid material would be heavy. So this is a diverse, Tudor City in general has diverse features, in particular terracotta. These are spires and parapets. This is another parapet. This is at the Essex House. We're actually doing work there. Ryan is also going to touch upon that. It's a pretty griffin, if you ask me. Bronze panels, decorative panels. Arch stained glass windows. Skylights, stained glass as well. This is original to the building. This is at the Essex House lobby. And then this is 5 Tudor. This is an overview of 5 Tudor. Now I'm going to touch on the Tudor City sign. So everyone's kind of familiar with the Tudor City sign. Not sure if everyone knew that there were actually 2 signs, right? So this is the one that's still there today. It's on 45 Tudor City Place, the northern side of 42nd Street. This is how it looked at night. And this was the original kind of like thinking behind it. They wanted it, well, Fred wanted it on both sides of 42nd Street. Unfortunately, they built the building in front of it. Fred built a building in front of his sign. Long story short, once the building was built, he realized that you can't see the Tudor City sign, so he removed it, 1933. All right, so the new kid on the block, United Nations, was built in 1952. You can imagine if you had a terrace in Tudor City, you can't essentially use your terrace when the president's in town, so that's a big problem, right? The benefit of having United Nations there is that they widened 42nd Street. They actually, I think it went from 60 feet and then ultimately ended up at 100 feet wide. So what did that do? The byproduct of that is they were able to build the Tudor City Bridge. And I'm pretty sure you guys know about the iconic shot, right? Summer equinox, see the sun set right down 42nd Street. And then in 1988, Tudor City became a landmark district in New York City. So as you can see, the surrounding environment around Tudor City has changed, but the spirit of the development to be a city within the city still lives on today. The maintenance of these historic fabrics have been further preserved by the evolution of increased Department of Buildings inspection requirements, which Eric Vonderhyde will further discuss. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. My name is Eric Vonderhyde. I'm a principal at Bertolini Architectural Works. I actually joined Oswald in 1997, which turned out to be a transitional year for the facade restoration industry. It was the year that we went from the initial facade protocols under Local Law 10, and in 1988, it became Local Law 11, which I think is the name that most of you are familiar with. I'm going to touch upon sort of how these rules and regulations evolved over time, and essentially they've impacted the type of work we've done, the methodology behind it, and certainly the extent, which Ryan will touch upon. The current laws right now sort of mandate that we're doing very, very extensive repairs at this moment in time. So the first law, and it was a landmark law in the US, was the first law of its kind, was Local Law 10 of 1980. It was signed into law by Mayor Koch. It was unfortunately put into place because of an injury and death of a young woman who attended Bernard College. You have to think that in 1980, a lot of these buildings, and Oswald touched upon this, we have terracotta buildings that were built in the late 1800s, Tudor City through the 1930s. There was no program of repairs, maintenance, inspection. To say by 1980 that these older pre-war buildings were in disrepair would be an understatement. The tar is just the tip of the iceberg of things that even I was seeing in the late 90s. So this first law implemented a system of every 5 years, you needed to inspect the buildings visually, provide a report to the city, and indicate whether or not the building had safe conditions, precautionary conditions, or unsafe conditions. The precautionary conditions in the 1980s through 1998 gave professionals a lot of discretion in how they designated things. So that discretion allowed some bad actors to continue to label the building as safe, provide a photo or two, and not actually repair the building. So there's a few keywords here. This is, I think, going to be a handout or available online. I don't want to go through all of them. The only thing I want to touch upon here is number 4, which is the Safe with Repair and Maintenance Program, SWARP. It's a term that we use in the industry all the time, and it's how we designate an item that isn't safe or unsafe, and we have to give a time frame for its repair. So in the time from 1980 to 1988, I should also say, sorry, in 1980 law, we only had to inspect the street facade. They didn't make any of the returns or the rear courtyard facades relevant. It was purely a street facade thing. And unfortunately, in the time between 1980 and 1998, there were a few more incidents, and 2 of those incidents happened at return facades. So they realized that there was a big hole in the law and that they needed to adopt a new law. So in 1998, Rudy Giuliani signed local law 11 of 98. It replaced local law 10, and it required us to inspect all of the facades. It also added a hands-on inspection, meaning we had to go on a scaffold and get up close. And I can tell you from personal experience, this dramatically changed the type of things that we were finding. A pair of binoculars and a telephoto lens is extremely limited in what you can see. You're only looking at it from a certain angle. So once we got on the scaffolds, and I think around 1998, the photo that Oswald showed of the Essex with that really bad steel, that's the sort of stuff that came up when you got up close. It was an oh my God moment. And that happened once they implemented the requirements for hands-on scaffold inspections. So it stayed the same at this time. We still had 5 years. Every 5 years we would report. We submitted a written report, and we still had a lot of discretion at this time as professionals as to what the timeframes were for repairs. If we could list it cycle over cycle, meaning we could call something swamp and say we're going to continue to monitor it, and we could come back 5 years later and say, oh, it's continuing to be good. That changed in 2010. So this isn't an image that anything that happened with us. I'm always interested how they captured this moment in time, but this is the sort of thing that they're trying to stop by these local laws. And in fact, I think countless lives have probably been saved through these laws being in place. So in 2010, Local Law 11 became FISP, which stands for the Façade Inspection and Safety Program. There weren't any dramatic changes other than the name change. They did add railings to the list. Unfortunately, around that time, a woman fell to her death leaning against a railing. So they made that part of our inspection protocols. They also increased inspections and enforcement by the Department of Buildings. This also increased the level at which we started diagnosing things. You know, the industry as a whole, if you have somebody coming and checking on you, is more apt to list all of the things that they may find. And the last thing that they did, and this was probably a good thing, is they standardized the reporting format. Up until this point, once again, it was at the professional's discretion what they were submitting to the Department of Buildings, and it took them forever to do the reviews and to tell us what they thought of the reports. So here's the big one. In February 2022, they really changed the FISP regulations. They increased the number of inspections from 1 to every 60 feet. So to put that in context, a building like 5 Tudor City Place, which is one of the largest buildings footprint-wise in the entire Tudor City District, went from 1 required inspection to 15 required hands-on inspections. So of course, we're going to be able to see more of the terracotta. What also happened, and what was a precursor to this, is we continued to have terracotta failures. So the city was really critically looking at terracotta and masonry defects, and they required us to look at them more closely as well. They added additional qualifications to be a facade inspector. What would happen when there would be a recession or something like that, you'd get a bunch of people who would enter the profession in order to make ends meet in the interim, but they didn't know what they were looking at. So they actually made it really robust. We require 7 years of hands-on experience doing solely this kind of work in order to provide a report to the city of New York. They expanded civil penalties. They asked us to increase our photographic evidence. You guys now need to post in your lobby the status of your building, whether it's safe, swamp, or unsafe. But the biggest thing that they did is they actually codified all the defects that we have to report on. On the next slide, I think, or 2 slides from here, we have references to the DOB website, which show these defects which we have to report on. So they sort of took the discretion out of our hands. So now when we see a defect, we have to report on it in some way. I'll touch on this real quick. They broke the reports down into subcycles. You used to have over 10,000 reports handed in primarily around the same day. They realized they couldn't review them in a timely manner. So they broke by the building's lot them into 3 separate subcycles that need to be submitted over that 5-year period. So here's the FISP rule changes in aggregate, and the 2 bottom pieces are the sources that you can go and actually see the changes in the laws. But number 2, it's actually a booklet that the DOB prepared that shows in photographic form all of the different conditions that we have to report on. I believe there are 60 conditions just for terracotta. I mean, it's or between brick and terracotta that we need to report on. So as these rules and regulations have increased, so have the size of the restoration campaigns behind them. So concurrently with the Department of Buildings focusing on terracotta, asking us to do more, Landmarks in the parallel was also looking at terracotta and considering it more and more important. So the DOB wants us to replace terracotta. Landmarks would like us to salvage it as much as possible. And that juxtaposition has created a scenario where costs have gone up and the duration of time has gone up. So that's why we mentioned this, is that they have opposing views. Of course, Landmarks wants things to be safe, but they also value the original elements in terracotta. So this was shown before on Oswald's presentation, but I want to touch on it as I transition over to Ryan Hopewell, because this is one of the last big facade restorations that I personally did where I was on the scaffold. And these were the kinds of conditions we were running into all of the time. This is got a steel angle inside that aligns with that. And this band is at the 18th floor. It runs the entire length, 400 feet along First Avenue, and on all of the returns, it was about 1,000 linear feet just of these stones. We ended up replacing all of them. There was no way to salvage them. So these are the types of campaigns that we started seeing. At that time, we were doing primarily patching, we were doing pinning, we were doing stabilization, until we finally turned the corner, and now we're really forced to do wholesale replacements. And Ryan has a bunch of examples of those replacements. So I think that's it. I'll turn it over to Ryan. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ryan Hopewell. I'm an associate principal at Bertolini Architectural Works. I've been with the firm approximately 6 years, and I'm going to walk you through kind of the resultant of everything we've talked about this evening, right? So these are older buildings, they're made of terracotta, which is fragile, and we have a new set of laws in place, right? So through the years, we've done several campaigns, and we're not going to talk about the boring stuff like your common brick, your common terracotta. We've done thousands and thousands and thousands of square feet of these types of replacements. We're really going to focus on the ornamentation, specifically terracotta, fiberglass, and cast stone, right? So all of these materials have usages, and we use them widely across the complex as needed. Sorry. So the three buildings we're going to highlight are 325 East 41st Street, the Essex House, 25 Tudor City Place, Tudor Tower, 320 East 42nd, the Woodstock, and 5 Tudor, the Windsor. So I just told you guys all about terracotta and fiberglass. That's not the first thing we're going to talk about. We're actually going to talk about the entryway to this building, which is, and the reason we're talking about it is because it's small, but it's extremely complex, right? So we're working under current guidelines, current building codes, right? And these were built pre-war. So if you just look at it, it looks like an inane kind of entryway, but you see these arrows here, you know, that little step caused tons and tons of issues, right? So one of the challenges we tried to address when we redid the plaza was, one, either reduce the step or get rid of the step, and also the water management issues, right? So this is pitched towards the building. So water would collect at that step. Actually, I got a pointer. It would collect here. And sometimes if you had a big enough rain, it would actually go into the building, right? So these are large issues. So these were a couple of the things initially that we set on the planning to fix. So once we came up with a plan, we then presented it to Landmarks. Landmarks accepted our plan, and then it was up to the contractor to then build it. Because the unique part about this is typically pavers are pretty unified, like a 2x2. But if you see here, the original pattern it varies, right? You've got smaller tiles, you've got larger tiles, you've got rectangles, squares. So this was some challenges the contractor had to figure out. And the next slide here is kind of a progress photo. It shows you one, the depth we were working with here. So this black mat here is actually the sub-drainage system. So now when it rains, the water goes between the joints of the tiles. It goes underneath to the deck, and then it goes through the drain and drains. So we'll jump to the last photo here. No more step, and water will not collect here because it actually goes below the tiles to the subsurface drains. So sticking with the Essex, now moving into the facade, this is a parapet detail we recently designed. So some of the following photos are from a past campaign, roughly 5 years ago. This detail will be implemented in the next couple of years. And the interesting thing here is that none of the buildings originally had waterproofing. So what we did, we came in and created like a curb here so we could actually have a surface to waterproof on the inside. So if any water were to collect here, we also have a waterproofing membrane that comes down that not only protects the steel, but pushes the water away from the building. So this is a typical parapet demolition at Essex House. They've got very unique terracotta parapet. It's pretty much all terracotta. I wish I had a photo of it, but the point is that when you demo it, you have something like this, right? So you've got this water table here, and as you can see, there's really no waterproofing here. So the original construction relied on the density of the materials. You just had the materials, mortar, it was all packed in together and was relying on that for waterproofing. Over time, as Oswald mentioned, the steel will expand the terracotta, which will allow more water to get in, and this is why many people experience leaks in their apartments, specifically on the upper floors. So this is a demo photo, and this is the same area, which we've now introduced a more modern type of waterproofing here. So we've got a through wall flashing that goes from the roof here to the outside. And then we've also introduced steel reinforcing. And here's another photo. So the steel reinforcing, this is the contractor dry setting the stones to make sure the reinforcing aligns with the original holes. And then this photo here shows the parapet roughly 3/4 complete. It just needs coping to go on top. And I'm sorry for everyone online. I have a laser pointer. I'm pointing at things, so I'm doing my best to describe this. And then that's all for the Essex. We're going to jump to 25 Tudor City Place, the Tudor Tower. So this is sort of a placeholder. This ornamentation currently has taken down where we have a project ongoing there. This cartouche, as we call it, has been completely removed. And we actually got Landmark's approval to go back in fiberglass. So I'm going to go into more detail about constructing this later on, because at 5 Tudor, we not only have taken it down, but we've replaced it. So I can go into more detail about the process of the fiberglass and about constructing this element. Very interesting fact with this, there are 3 of these ornamentations in Tudor City Place at 5 Tudor, 25 Tudor, and 45 Tudor, all of which are exactly the same, except for 45 Tudor has a different colored terracotta. So 5 and 25 are identical down to the 1/2 inch. Actually, we measured this multiple times. We had a laser scan done of these, and it is within a 1/2 inch. So even in 1929, they were paying attention to the details. So this is something we replaced in kind with terracotta, which we have a sample of that here. And afterwards, you guys can all feel it. But this is the original Griffin. And this is the replacement Griffin. So besides looking newer, we also introduced a joint here. And this was by the recommendation of the terracotta manufacturer. In this case, we used Boston Valley, and they recommended it to help, 1, with the constructability of it, and 2, for the longevity of it, right? You have one piece, if one breaks, it's just better for the longevity of it. And the following shows both pieces. This is the base, and this is the head. All right, and then now we're going to jump to 320 East 42nd, the Woodstock. All right, so the photo on the left may not look like anything, but it's actually what the photo on the right is sitting on. There's a lot of interesting components here. So this is the steel substructure that actually supports this. And the green membrane here is the waterproofing. So the waterproofing acts as twofold in this case. 1, it protects the steel from getting wet and corroding. And 2, this membrane here keeps the water from either percolating down, and also acts as water management to keep the water out of the element and towards the face of the facade. And this is completed. He's an angry guy, but it's cool, right? All right, that's all with Woodstock. And now we're jumping into 5 Tudor. So this, of all the campaigns we've done, this is by far the largest restoration. There's too many things to go into, but we're really going to hit the big elements. Again, the cartouche. And then we also rebuilt all these spires. So throughout, there's 10 penthouses, and throughout the 10 penthouses, there's 34 spires, which were changed with cast stone. We have a sample of that here. So this is cast stone, which is, it's a very noble material, but it's much heavier. Afterwards, you guys can feel the difference in the two, but it is a very good substitute for this type of construction. So we're going to start with the cartouche, and these are kind of some of the schematic drawings we started with when we started the initial planning for converting it from terracotta to fiberglass. So we came up with these drawings. We had them scanned, which is a very accurate technology. It takes it down to a 32nd of an inch. We had it scanned, we put it into AutoCAD, and then we mapped out all the joinery. Then we submitted our proposal to Landmarks. They had questions, we went over them, and ultimately we got the proposal approved. This is what it looks like once the cartouche was demoed. You've got your waterproofing here protecting the steel. And this, it doesn't look as big in the photos, but when you put it up, these guys here are probably 6 feet tall. But this is a huge element. This is a very huge element. And this is totally in fiberglass. So this is a dry set. So when we initially started the manufacturing process, we had a lot of communication with the fiberglass manufacturer, their engineer, because there was a lot that went into this, right? Because the original construction relied on the heft of the material. When you convert it to fiberglass, yes, you can do it, but there are some constructability issues. Typically, it's related to, this engineer was worried about the moment because it was so tall. And this is a video of just typical fiberglass. While we were there, we captured this video, but this is how they make fiberglass. There's like a glass mat, and then they spray resins on it to build it up.
One quick second. Go ahead.
So after it was dry set in the shop, it was delivered to the site. As you can see here, the photo on the right is actually showing setting this base stone, which is shown on the left. And as I was discussing earlier, when we built it, we actually constructed it very similar to the original construction. The original construction was a lot of hollow units, but a lot of times they used masonry to tie in the bricks in the back. So what we did here is we actually infilled all these lower areas with brick to act as a ballast, right? Because at this point, you can see the thin shell. We needed something to add some heft to it. So the engineering cows came back, and we actually had to fill these lower pieces as much as we could with brick and mortar to add that weight. Here's another video. This is showing them set the second piece. So this is a photo from behind it. And something I'd like to point out now is that you saw this large piece being set. Something interesting, originally it was many more pieces. We reduced it down to 4 pieces. And what we did was we mimicked the original joinery with faux joints, right? So if you go and look at it now, you've got sanded caulk joints that mimic the original mortar joints. So what we did was we reduced the weight and we increased the size of the pieces, but we also maintained the fabric of the building by keeping the joinery. So now we're going to discuss a little bit of the spire reconstruction, which again, this is the cast. Oh, I'm sorry. This is fiberglass. So this is essentially what the cartouche was made of. All right, so we'll discuss the spires here. So again, you've got your typical waterproofing, protecting the steel, keeping the water out of the building. Again, these are cast stone units, and you can't really see it here if you were to zoom, because we add so much weight to these spires. Because the original terracotta were heavy, but they're not heavy like cast concrete. We actually install intermediate plates to help support the units above. So the last ornament we're going to talk about at 5 Tudor are the gargoyles, which are very cool. And this is a in-progress photo. The one on the right here is completed, and the one on the left, it still needs the headset. Now, this was a very similar situation at 25 Tudor City Place, where we introduced the joint. This, again, was recommended by Boston Valley for constructability issues and longevity issues. So here's the joint across the shield that was introduced. This is the dry set in Boston Valley shop. And this is an up close completed photo of it. We've got one last video here.
Look past the buildings in the skyline. See the creatures watching over you. Looking down on us is a better way of putting it. Gargoyles and statues stand at attention right on the edge. Get up close and personal on the roof of one of the historic buildings in Tudor City. It's something to be standing here.
This gives us one of the best vantage points of all of the buildings that we've been working on.
We're sort of like building doctors. Our profession is architecture.
And I bet there's a lot of work then around New York.
There is, yeah. We're at a specific moment in time where all of these are hitting a certain vintage,
Right.
and we're seeing that we're replacing more of the original fabric than we had to in the past. And this is a perfect example where these statues have been here for 90 years, and finally we've reached a moment where they needed to be replaced.
Oswald Bertolini and Eric Vonderhyde. Check out the work of their firm, Bertolini Architectural Works. They're restoring certain exterior sections and structures of 3 Tudor City buildings. That includes 9 statues.
One of the most exciting things for me is climbing up there, being with the workers, checking the conditions, and then seeing as they build it.
The new figures were fabricated at Boston Valley Terracotta in Orchard Park, New York. It's closer to Buffalo than it is New York City, but the pieces fit right in. When possible, original masonry is used as a reference. Gargoyles and statues have both a design and structural function, helping direct water sometimes. They add to the view, or maybe even preserve the good luck of a place.
What we have to do when we rebuild these things wholesale is make them watertight, integrate the new technologies, but still have them look exactly like they did before.
These guys will be watching over the neighborhood at 2nd Avenue and 42nd Street in Manhattan well into the next century. In Tudor City, Greg Mocker, Pix 11 News.
All right, everyone, that concludes our presentation.
Thank you. I want to thank the whole Bertolini team. We'll go into more expansive thanks at the conclusion of the lecture, but really thank you for being such splendid and wonderful terracotta doctors. So thank you very much. So we will take some questions now, and if the panel would like to go up, and if we're going to be taking both online and in-person questions, and I think we might have. I'm going to take an online question first of all. What happened to the tenements and the people who live there?
I think that, first of all, we don't know, and we didn't want to investigate that because it's always a sad story when you're kicking people out. But in the name of progress, a lot of changes, forceful and dramatic, were done over the years in the city and many places around the world. In this case, there were some tenements, but the bulk of the area had a use of the slaughterhouses. So not a lot of people wanted to live there, and it was not a very difficult transition. We understand, but we don't know. We were not there.
Of course, I think that's a very fair answer. Can I take okay, I'll take an in-person question. And here's Victoria Dengel, our Executive Director.
I'll add to Karen's thanks a little bit later, but just off the top of my head right away, what a rich presentation, and really one of my favorite evers. I have to say, it was incredible, really. So thank you.
Thank you. We love what we do. And,
Oh,
and
I
thank
could
you for the
tell.
opportunity.
And what a
to present
team.
this.
We don't, the all four of you here, it's just incredible. So thank you. In terms of the fiberglass and landmarks allowing for fiberglass, what determines that? Because they don't give that up so easily.
Right. Well, there is a general guideline which says that if your building is a historic landmark per se, you have to use the original materials. However, if you are in a landmarks district, there's a certain leeway. So the rule of thumb is that below the 7th floor, everything has to go back in the original material, whether it's marble, limestone, brick, etc. From the 7th floor and up, or the 8th floor and up, I should say, Landmarks Preservation Commission gives the preservationists a certain discretion as to whether the material that you're proposing as an alternate is viable, acceptable, or not. And we have to go through a very exacting process. We submit samples. Sometimes we have had the contractors drag huge pieces into the commission to show them what it would look like. And eventually, if it makes sense and what you're proposing is satisfactory, they may approve it. They also use logic. I mean, the front facades on the streets are treated with much more care than sometimes a courtyard that nobody can see. And so it depends on the product, the circumstances, but they can do it.
Just to add, when we applied for the cartouche specifically, we were uncertain they were going to approve it. It was kind of untried, that scale of terracotta or fiberglass being done. And we were really pleased that they allowed it. And it saved the building a dramatic amount of money. I mean, I think it was less than 50% the cost of if we had to go back to terracotta. Time as well. Time was the big driver.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because should I talk? Are the online people listening? Or
Yes.
should we use the microphone, I guess? Is it working? All right, there it is. All right. Yeah. Well, now I lost my thought. The time factor is integral in this whole thing, right? Because to get the fiberglass done was a time-consuming process in itself. We saw the drawings earlier. We had to go through it. We had to map out the joinery. We had to do the shops. We had to do the structural calculations. All of these things take time. Very similar to the terracotta. You've got the color development, and you only have 2 manufacturers, which means these very ornate pieces, many of them have to be hand carved right? So it takes a long, long time. In this case, it probably would have taken between 12 and 15 months to get the piece, where in fiberglass, we changed it in about 6.
Nice note, though, it was taken apart, it was the middle of the pandemic. It just happened, we had taken it apart and it sat for about 8 months, just wrapped. So we can go back to it.
Would you mind answering a couple more fiberglass questions? These are both from online. If you don't mind, I'll read them both out. This is from Deborah. When you replace a decorative element with fiberglass, do you then use the original in a park setting or sell it to an interested collector? And this is, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask the second question. How does fiberglass hold up under high winds, hurricanes? But maybe your question, your answer about the 7th floor, maybe answer that.
The first, were they asking what happens when the ornaments get taken down?
Yes.
Who gets them?
Yes. What
Oh, yeah,
happens?
no,
What happens?
there's anybody involved with the project has their hand out, right? So usually the boards have first choice. Somebody wants it for a country house or something like this. So they're always spoken for. Yeah, they don't go to good old things or something like this,
Right.
right?
Right. Okay. Well.
And then in terms of the hurricane, that's what we were discussing earlier, because you've got this thin shell here, right? I mean, it's a little, the cartouche is actually a little thicker than this, but what you have is, it is a little flimsy in the weight, right? So that's why we had to introduce the brick ballast. We actually had to fill it with as much brick and mortar as we could.
We actually had to add structural reinforcing as well to the existing steel in order to anchor it down even further.
Yeah, that's
The
right.
material itself wears well. If you imagine it's what bolt holes are made of. So from that perspective, it'll have a really long lifespan. And as we understand it, the outside glaze can be replaced, so it can be renewed 20, 25 years hence.
Right.
But,
Thank you.
and also, to be completely honest, we let licensed engineers deal with that. We're humble architects. We don't do math. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, understandably. I can tell you the online questions are coming in fast and furious, but we're going to take an in-person question, and I'll take the gentleman over here. Hold on a second. Sorry, just one sec.
Thank you. How many buildings were actually restored? Every single one of the, I think you said there were 12. And what was the typical average cost for each building's restoration?
That is a very complicated question. I would say that some of the buildings, you look at this, and if you wanted to make it last 50 years, you probably need $100 million per building on the big ones. And you can't do that. So we're constantly, doing this delicate balancing act of trying to determine which pieces need to be replaced or restored urgently, which ones are a great idea to do them because you're already there. You have the forms, you have the mobilization, which is huge part of the cost. And so it's a team effort. You really need to engage the building and see what they can do. And also don't forget, these projects they take place over a number of years. So you may have a budget of $3.5 million and do it in 2 years. You may have $8 million and you do it over 6 years. So the budget, the boards look at this as an annual expense. Some of them borrow the money, and the limitation is about money. It varies from building to building. Some of them are in a good financial position. Some of them are in a weak financial position. And so it's hard to say. I mean, it's all in the millions of dollars, and we're just kind of working on the tip of the iceberg, literally.
Quick math, at 5 Tudor since I came in 97, we've done close to $20 million worth of restoration.
All of the buildings have received work. We have not been involved with all of them. And some of them are in much better shape than others. I don't want to point any fingers, but they're all not the same.
I'm just wondering, if if the three of you, Oswald, we can hear very clearly, but if the three of you wouldn't mind sharing the other mic, thank you. I'm going to take another in-person question, and I'm going to work my way around the room.
So my question refers to the substructure. It seems like a lot of the damage to the terracotta happens from water reaching the steel members inside, where the damage is hidden from rust packing. When you gave that one example, you had to replace hundreds, if not 1,000 feet of terracotta. When you guys remove the terracotta, what's your treatment to deal with the ice packing of those members that are left behind?
Right.
How do you deal with the corrosion?
Eric, you want to take that?
So it depends on how badly deteriorated the steel is. Often, even though you got a lot of rust jacking, like Oswald said, 7/8 of an inch, you've only lost 1/8 of an inch of the original material. So we can often salvage it. We can scrape it, we prime it, we paint it, and then we always put some sort of waterproofing in there. There are, and in the case you're referring to, some miscues from the original construction. In that particular case, they had buried the support steel inside the terracotta and the water had no place to go. So we actually had to redesign the steel in that particular case to be supported from below and to allow us to install the waterproofing in such a way that water leaked out and didn't get trapped behind the unit. Because in addition to the rust jacking, you also get something called ice jacking. We get a lot of freeze-thaw cycles in New York City. The water gets into the small cracks and it just over time expands these cracks. More water gets in, freezes, it thaws. And New York is notorious for having a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, far beyond anything you'd see like in Canada or Chicago.
Will you be willing to keep on answering a few more questions? I know that we have run a little longer, but perhaps we'll take another 5 to 10 minutes of questions, because there's certainly there's a great and eager interest.
Right.
Happy to. Thank you. So I'm going to ask an online question. This is from Dennis, a resident. When will number 5 be done?
Okay.
You want to do the short answer?
Yeah, well, short answer is we're getting kicked out. So we have a deadline to wrap it up by the end of the year. And this is based on the fatigue of everybody in the building. So we think that we have done all the urgent stuff and a great deal of the important restoration. And next year, you hopefully not going to have to see the contractors or our firm in there.
Scaffold free, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go, Dennis. Great news. And we'll have the most beautiful building. Okay, I'm going to take an online question. An in-person question.
What was at the site of, Tudor City Place before it was there?
Tennis courts originally. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. How long, this is from Mary online, how long has the restoration been going on? Sorry, how long has the restoration been going on?
Okay, we've had several campaigns. I started working on the first one, which was in 1991, when typically we've gone back every 5 years in most buildings. And it was a matter of the resources. We also have done more, like Eric said, because the requirements of the law has been more intense in terms of the repairs, and also the technology has changed, it has improved in many senses, and it has failed in other senses. We used to do welding of cracked units of terracotta, and the welding was magnificent, but it turns out that the terracotta fabric was too weak, and while the welding would hold up, it would crack identically, like half an inch adjacent to the welding. So we've been learning, and the manufacturers that with their research are also learning, but it's kind of a heavy, slow process, like I said, because of the cost and because the buildings have kind of crossed the limit of which the terracotta was meant to perform. So the deterioration accelerates, and we'll be doing more and more work. So on and off, every 5 years, we have been in all of these buildings, and the last campaigns have been the more intense.
Right, thank you. In person? Sir,
It's Scott Nagel. Hi, Scott.
say good to see Oswald and Eric again as an ex-board member for 5. I'm curious how you match color. You haven't hit that. Because do you do it because the elements, obviously 100 years has taken its toll on color.
Right.
Do you go to the current color? Do you go back to the original color and wait another 100 years till it matches?
Yes.
So the answer is we always go back to the original color and shading. If we're doing it in terracotta, Boston Valley has a massive library of all the glazes that they've sort of ever fabricated. So they produce some glaze samples that we present to landmarks next to the original fabric. For the fiberglass, they went through a good number of iterations, but once again, we always match clean original terracotta. Oswald has made the argument that perhaps in some of these materials, particularly cast stone, which fades, maybe let us go a little bit darker because it's going to fade more into the color it should be, but so far landmarks hasn't allowed us to do that.
Okay, an online question. Thank you for the answer. Is there a lightning protection incorporated into the new material details since their support is steel? This is from Neil.
The answer is no. Some of the buildings have had lining arrestors installed originally at the top of the buildings. So the ones that have them. We have not worked on those areas of the building. And it is a very complex, I have done that process and it's not very nice looking. You're putting giant cables coming off metal poles and you need to take them either to the ground or to the steel structure. And in many cases, it goes into the water piping system that apparently it sounds like counterintuitive, but they absorb the discharge. I don't know much more about that.
Well, it's also normally at the highest point of the building. So that would be where they have these spires. They've been removed, but that's the location. These are empty attic spaces. And I believe that's where they originally existed. The elements that we're doing are low enough that they wouldn't be hit. They're also less conductive, if you will. They don't have a lot of steel in them.
Right. We will just take a couple more questions. And I'm going to over here, but I will take a question over here because I feel this side has been underrepresented in the Q&A. So, sir, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Again, wonderful presentation. One of the materials that I haven't heard too much about that does give Tudor City its feeling of being from another century is wrought iron. And there's plenty of it there. We haven't heard what has been done because that was also hand created. Thank you.
Okay, the wrought iron is in fantastic condition. So our interventions in general have been limited to including in the specs to just sand it, remove everything carefully because there's lead in the paint and repaint it. But most of it hasn't come under our restoration projects because the buildings have their own maintenance system going and they take care of that part.
Okay, I'm going to ask an online question. This will be the final online question, and I apologize if I wasn't able to get to your question. Will you be doing works on the other part of the building? And this is from Benita.
Well, the work is sort of dictated by the locations that need it the most. This go around in Tudor, driven by a lot of the laws, we've done some really extensive replacements. So we're hoping that future campaigns are less. Carlos is about to embark on a really large scale replacement of the parapets at the Essex, which is going to be done in terracotta. It's something we've been planning with them for 15, 20 years. Finally, we've arrived at the point where we have to do it. So that'll probably be our last really big campaign there as well. But it's really dictated by what the buildings are doing and what we find every cycle we go back for the local laws.
By failures.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's clearly what magnificent work you've been doing. Okay, our final online question. Do we have anyone over here who has a question? Okay.
All right, thank you for such a stunning presentation. Really enjoyed it. I happen to own a property that's in its 125th year here in New York City. Has the Landmarks Commission relaxed some of its requirements I mean, let's face it, you can't get all that material. It doesn't exist.
They haven't, hence the
What have
the
you
timelines.
discovered working with the Landmarks Commission? Are they flexible?
Okay,
We want to continue working with the Landmarks Commission.
yeah. So the truth is that
I'm in a pickle here.
okay. You need to look at the positive side. Thanks to their work, a lot of these buildings keep their historical value, their ornamentation, and all the stuff that makes us love them. The process, because at the end of the day, you write the rules and how you apply them can be subjective. So they have a structure. We know how to work with them, and we have a good track record. We actually want to do the best for the building, something that can be paid for by our client, but also that complies with the requirements from Landmarks. And we know what we're doing. So we have a very honest dialogue, and sometimes we don't agree on the little details, but on the big picture, we're on the same page. And it's a matter of how we're going to do it, what are we going to provide, can we do it, show them the samples, and getting it done. We look at this as teamwork, and I have to say, I really like to say thank you to all the boards that have gone through this process with us, because they need to deal with the residents and getting money from everybody to do it. I like to thank in particular two of the management companies that have been fantastic about getting everybody to go through, Tudor Realty Services and PRC. They've done an excellent job of helping their residents go through this. And also I want to name, Upgrade Contracting has helped in a lot of these projects. They do a fabulous job. And of course, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, they have shown good sense. They've been flexible many times. I can see a fiberglass cartouche. You wouldn't think that you could do it. So I think it's important that you're credible, you're doing the right thing. And if you're honest, you can talk to them, and we're getting it done. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Oswald, just one second.
Oh.
Oswald,
Yes.
Eric, Ryan, Carlos, thank you all. You are just like a really wonderful Bertolini team. And your lecture was so informative, so comprehensive, and also just like such fantastic work that you have done on Tudor City, and to restore it in such a beautiful way, and to explain it in such as I said, in such a comprehensive way. We are so grateful to the four of you for sharing your expertise. So many, many thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to say a few more words. No, you haven't escaped quite yet. Okay. Just a few more words, because we do like to thank our speakers, particularly such an outstanding team. Victoria Dangle is also going to say a couple of words.
So as anyone knows who attends our lectures, Karen so eloquently leaves me very little to say because she covers everything. So thank you. And I seriously think that you belong on an episode of Stuart Varney's American Built. You have to look into it. Look it up. It's great. It's a great show, but I could picture it as I was listening. I said they belong on American Built. So, and for the audience, how many people live in Tudor City?
Yeah,
Yes, no, because we heard, all right. And I also wanted to thank Ralph Cormacino for first introducing us to Carlos. Thank you, Ralph, our faculty member. Thank you. And I just wanted to say that we have I did not expect the men that performed our restoration to be here, Nova Restoration. So they're with us tonight. They're surprise visitors, which means that they read my emails still. And last but not least, for anyone who's not really ever looked at our facade, our landmark facade, it was a 2-year restoration completed in November. I invite you to cross the street, but look both ways twice, because you have to these days, And just look at the facade. It's a beautiful facade. But again, back to you. Thank you for all the thought that you put into this lecture. We really enjoyed it. And please come back again with your future projects. All right? Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you all. Good night.